Thank you, Olivia. Call our committee of the whole meeting today to order. Is there any declaration of interest related to any item on this agenda? Not seeing any. Any business arising from minutes? Delegations. We have Thorsten Arnold with us this morning. He is here to talk to us about drinking water and the relationship with the karst regions in Bruce Grey counties. So welcome, sir. The floor is yours.
She did. Yes, thank you for the technicalities. The title of my talk is Urgent Need to Avert Threat of Drinking Water Disaster in Bruce Grey karst regions. I've given the same presentation in Bruce County. That's why I had Bruce Grey, not Grey Bruce. And I have given a longer version of this at the Drinking Water Source Protection Committee, which is the local stakeholder group enacting the Clean Water Act. So I co-authored the drinking water assessment report in this region, and I also have a PhD in watershed sciences. So just a little bit of background. I have to rush through this. I got involved in this when a friend of mine had this water in his well. It was brown, full of solids, and smelled like manure. The culprit from the well wasn't too difficult to spot. Just behind the well, a new landowner put his cattle into a low-lying spot that tends to pond. You can see in January and April how the area changed. He took the cattle out to make space. He put all the manure into the sinkhole and then turned it all into a cornfield. All is well that ends well, right? So I also looked at the broader systemic questions, and what I think we should put attention towards is that we know we have karst hydrology in many areas almost without overburden protection. This much soil on top of bedrock, this much soil, sometimes none at all. We also experience an era of agricultural intensification and land standardization that is, I don't want to say unprecedented, but it's very dramatic nowadays. And we happen to have lots of severances where farmers had severed off 5 or 10 lots from their farm, sold it to residents for residential living, thus protecting these citizens under the Environmental Bill of Rights that they have clean access to drinking water. And at the same time, as they retired, they sold off the remaining 90 acres to whoever bought it. And this is agricultural land without any restrictions. The karst aspect of our region is not reflected in our laws. We know where karst is. There's good mapping available. We know where there is no overburden protection. It's worth looking at how extensive this extremely vulnerable area with less than 2 feet of soil is in our region. It covers almost like the better part of a few municipalities. We have mapping of highly vulnerable aquifers through source water protection. But we don't have any policies because drinking water, the Clean Water Act only gives the Source Protection Committee the right to enact education and advocacy around highly vulnerable aquifers. The change of agriculture is quite dramatic. I looked at the picture in Jackson between 2005, where most of the area was in pastures, and there were just pockets of undisturbed bare soil. And 2021, it's dramatic. And in addition to the agricultural changes, we now have subdivisions with lots of people not protected by municipal drinking water systems, but only with the unregulated private drinking water systems. Around the well that was contaminated, if I only looked at the agricultural area and counted properties by size, we can see that there were almost 120 residential properties. There were 55 properties larger than 50 acres, and all of those are farmed by maybe a handful of farmers. So we are now setting through our severances, setting the citizen rights of more than 100 homes against the farming rights of a handful of farmers. And this ends up giving us a mixed residential agricultural landscape that is just on the middle of a karst aquifer. What could go wrong? This is a picture where from Campbell, the church is just behind me. And when you eat your turkey, remember that the poo of this turkey barns gets put on raw onto these fields where in the drainage ditches, the bedrock is there, like it looks like a parking lot, and the soil is only about a foot high, and they put manure on it, and the groundwater will absorb this manure. So looking at a precedent case in Door Peninsula, Wisconsin, which is just on the other side of the escarpment with almost identical hydrology. It's United States, different law, but they have the same beautiful hikes. They have the same beautiful coastlines. They have the same fracture traces on their pastures where you can see the bedrock because there's only this much soil on top. They had a massive expansion of dairy. Mind you, these barns have 7,000 cows in them. This is not how our farmers farm, just to make that clear. But what happened in Wisconsin was that about 25% of all wells in the county were contaminated. Huge impact on the community, health impacts, lots of community action. The US Department of Agriculture got involved, conducted 2 larger research studies, which are in exactly the same hydrogeological conditions, so you can learn from it. And what they did say is to be aware of nitrates. Don't just look at pathogens. Nitrates are really important. Septic systems in that area hardly had an impact on water quality, but it was large-scale agriculture. As I said, 7,000 cows per barn is a different kettle of fish. But around the well that got contaminated, we are also dealing with thousands of cows. So it's not that we are still in the 20 cows and 3 calves or 20 calves, tiny rural agriculture. Kewaunee has a policy response that is worth studying. In particular, there was a lot of research into how to regulate agriculture on extremely vulnerable aquifers with residential areas around. So this is useful for us. This is really good knowledge that any discussion should at least start with. It held up in 2 Wisconsin Supreme Court cases, so this is not shallow knowledge. This is really well done. Yeah, back at home, we know from data from 15 years ago that we are a hotspot for drinking water contamination. This was before agriculture changed and before we had the building boom. So the confluence threat is bubbling up stronger. And my informed opinion is if the current trend continues, then widespread water contamination is not a question of if, but only a question of when. And there will be community action. The question is, will it happen before we have a disaster that is costly, or do we first need the disaster, the pile of bodies, the loss of property damage to start getting active here? Yeah, there's economic risks for the tourism industry, retirement haven, and contaminated water doesn't really mix. So Justice O'Connor recommended after the Walkerton inquiry whether agencies should act proactively, swiftly, and transparently and responsibly. Question is, will our politicians do the same? I'll leave this. This is my last slide. I think what I recommend doing is first explicitly recognize that we have a confluence threat of karst, agricultural transformation, and the severances where private people are responsible for their private wells, but the groundwater is a public resource. So it's the public government's responsibility to protect the groundwater, because without groundwater, a private person has no access to water. This right now, a citizen can only go through the court system if his water is contaminated, and there's no protection. It's a big pain, and it's almost an impossible lawsuit. In this case that I presented, it's actually a very clear case, but in most other cases, homeowners don't have a chance. They may lose their access to drinking water. They may lose a third of the property value, and they have almost no repercussions for justice. So yes, thank you very much for your time. I'm happy to talk more, but time is limited here. So, thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Are there any questions from any councillors regarding the presentation? And there's a lot of information there for sure. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions, so I will thank you very much for your time, sir, and I appreciate you coming out today to share that information with us. Thank you. Determination of items requiring separate discussion. We have the consent agenda there. Are there any items on that agenda you'd like removed for further discussion? Councillor Nielsen.
Thank you, Ward Milne. I'd just like to pull 6B, please.
Anyone else? Okay. Someone consider making a motion to receive the balance of the items, save and accept 6B. Councillor DeBreen, second. Councillor Patterson, thank you. All those in favor? That is carried. Going down to items for direction and discussion. We have the first report there regarding housing planning data needs and regional housing strategy request. Liz Buckton is going to be presenting that report. She's on. There she is. She's online. Of course. Good morning, Liz. Sorry. Welcome.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Gordon. Good morning.
The floor is yours, Liz. Carry on.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So I think today I'll be sharing my own slides. So I'm just going to do that now. Just bear with me momentarily.
While you're doing that, Liz, I'll get a mover and seconder to adopt the recommendation. Councillor Pringle, seconded by Councillor Kentner.
Wonderful. Could somebody just confirm for me that you can see the slides properly there?
Yep, we can. Thank you.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you so much. So I'm very happy to be here, maybe not in body, but definitely in spirit and virtually today. We're a little under the weather, so just thought we would not share that with everyone in the room today. But I did want to highlight that there are 3 housing related reports in the council package today. 2 of those, the first 2 on the list here, were within that consent agenda. The third is the topic of the presentation here. But I would encourage those that maybe haven't had the opportunity to review the fulsome reports to do so. I think there's a lot of information, and I imagine around the council table, sorry, your heads are spinning with good housing information. Okay, so we wanted to address this report through a presentation. The county has received a formal request from the town of Blue Mountains that the county consider pursuing a regional housing strategy. And I think really in broad strokes, what the town of Blue Mountains was suggesting is that a regional approach as opposed to a local municipal strategy approach here would allow for us to capture and reflect the variation in housing need and supply, as well as municipal capacity across the county. And you know, I think that top-down view potentially has some other benefits as well, as I'll further discuss. So we have talked about it around the Affordable Housing Community of Practice table. There has been general staff level support voiced around that table for a regional strategy. And it was identified by members of the community of practice that resourcing can be really challenging, of course, at the local level. And so perhaps having some more direction from the county may be helpful in identifying how they'll engage around the Housing Action Plan and related work. And I think from a county staff perspective as well, we thought that there could be some potential to that regional approach, really allowing us to kind of highlight or dive into those areas where there are actions that would be regionally strategic and of significance, and to allow us to better incorporate and tie together the economic development and employment, land planning with the workforce housing needs as part of our housing planning. Okay, so I will we'll spend a few minutes here. I just wanted to kind of caveat first off that you know, we have not offered in the report explicitly what the town of Blue Mountains had suggested in their letter. The letter that they've provided to us along with the staff report are identified as appendices to the report if anyone does want to look. But I think initially they had proposed perhaps a more consultant-driven RFP-based type of process for preparation of a strategy. We did want to highlight that what we have presented, we think really identifies and furthers the building blocks that would support that strategy work and could roll into that strategy work. But I think we are looking at doing that in a way that is perhaps a little less consultant-based and more something that would be easily accessible and repeatable in-house. So firstly, we are recommending, and we'll get to those recommendations for further discussion, but we are recommending that we move forward with a growth management strategy update that was already earmarked for 2025, just how it falls in our data update cycle. But in this case, we are looking to expand the scope of that work a little bit. Firstly, that would address some of the Ministry of Finance projections that have been established that would apply to our region. Those are higher than what is identified in our growth management strategy work thus far, so we will need to reconcile that. And the other thing, like I said, is to tease out those assumptions around workforce housing needs and try and tie those data processes together a little bit. We also anticipate moving forward, subject to council's approval, with the completion of a housing need assessment on a countywide basis. In July, the federal government has released now a template for housing needs assessment, and that really identifies the different data sources, both quantitative and qualitative, that should be incorporated for consideration in a housing need assessment. And there are a lot of data sources that go into that. And so one of the things we've had the benefit of access to over the last year for data access is the Rural Housing Information System. And that is hosted with the Rural. And that's been a really handy tool, providing us with access to some data sources that we didn't have previously. And so we've had some very preliminary conversation with them. They have identified that there is the option to curate additional data sources to bring into that software platform. And we think that that would be an efficient way to provide that data for ourselves in future iterations. Okay, so a bit of a schematic here. So on the left-hand side, we can see the Housing Action Plan. On the right-hand side, the Housing and Homelessness Plan. The ownership or maintenance of these plans falls into different departments within the county. So myself in planning, we're looking primarily with the Housing Action Plan, whereas the Housing Manager and Community Services are operating under that Housing and Homelessness Plan. They do address slightly different things, and I'll explain that in a little more detail. But I guess I wanted to highlight that right now, we are tied together across those plans through the Affordable Housing Community of Practice. And so we have staff from community services and planning and economic development on occasion, together with the local municipal staff representatives on that community of practice, getting together every other month to have a conversation about housing and share information and ideas. But as you can see at the bottom of that slide, there are a whole range of other local actors that would have an interest in housing and may actually hold some of the solutions that will really facilitate that broad range of housing across types and price spectrums. Showing this in a different way, so we have the CMHC housing spectrum. I think we've all probably seen this a few times, but at the left-hand side, we are looking at largely subsidized types of units, homelessness supports, emergency shelter, transitional housing, through to social housing, again, covered off largely under the housing and homelessness plan of the county. And on the other end of the spectrum, largely market driven types of development, so home ownership and rental. And then in the middle, our plans have a little bit of overlap there as it relates to social housing, affordable rental, and affordable home ownership. And I think, looking at that left-hand side, really that housing and homelessness plan is seeking to address what does local government do, right? How do we fund, how do we establish, how do we deliver those supports and those types of housing? Whereas the Housing Action Plan is looking at, well, what can the market provide? How do we review? How do we direct? How do we permit that? But in that in-between piece is the types of housing, the affordable housing, the social housing that are more costly and more difficult to curate. The market isn't necessarily creating units at those price points or in that typology. And I think, we have discussed previously that local government revenue tools are challenged in providing the scale of resources needed to really kind of fill that middle gap ourselves or to substantially expand the social housing supply. And so I think there is additional question to be answered, and we've addressed it in an early ways in the Housing Action Plan, but really in that market or in the middle section of that graphic, the questions are, well, if the market can't provide it, if local government isn't providing it directly, how do we ensure that those types of housing options are available in our community? And I think what we've been seeing is that the nonprofit sector and the non-market sector play a role in that middle place. The projects that we're seeing go forward that include affordable and social housing are generally now mixed affordability projects. So we're seeing, a little bit of social housing, perhaps through agreement and incentive, some affordable rental, and then some market rental within the same project. And that's what drives viability. So thinking about what a strategy could address, I just included a sample guiding question here, but we would be looking at, how do we best arrange our housing supportive roles and expand those skills and resources and capacities held locally so that we are ensuring that fulsome range of housing options in our community. And I think first and foremost, identifying some approaches of how we will do that coordination piece across levels of government, agencies, boards, service manager, publicly funded educational institutions, as is now very explicitly addressed within the Provincial Planning Statement 2024. We would be looking at the identification of roles, functions, and capacities that local government would deliver, what capacities and functions are maybe best addressed by others, other actors in our community, and then identifying the types of skills, resources, and capacities that may not be held locally that we may need to introduce. Okay. And so particularly as it applies to that area of overlap on the housing spectrum, I think the strategy could also look at that piece around how does local government and those external actors interact? How do we interface? What does that look like? So where do we mutually see opportunities for innovation or partnership? What does that partnership perhaps look like? How do we share information? Are there communication structures needed to support that work? And then how do we monitor our progress? And of course, when all of the deliverables are ours, it's very easy to identify something or not. When those are community objectives, that's a little more difficult to pin down. So developing some approaches there. And just a cutesy little graphic along the bottom to try and illustrate perhaps the desired end result, which is we would have local government and those networked community organizations and partners understanding what that interface looks like so that we can move to a place where our housing objectives, our common housing objectives are at the center, and various different parties are empowered and enabled to entertain and participate in solution finding. So we've talked about these elements individually. I do provide a table within the report that tries to expand upon the nature of these different pieces that we're looking to pull together. But just briefly, so with the growth management strategy, that really does provide us with the understanding of what we're planning for. It really underpins the land allocation and servicing requirements for our municipalities, and that in turn informs the municipal development charge process around how those will be funded. The housing need assessment would pull from the data following from that growth management strategy around where we're headed in the future, would pull in our understanding of local supply, include some gap analysis, and those gaps would then inform where we go with our strategy and action. The strategy, as I've noted, we'd be looking to offer that common conceptual framework, building from our understandings of what are needed and where the opportunities and risks may fall, and really with that goal of facilitating coherence and action across various sectors. And then the housing action plan could be updated to be just a little more specifically tactical on those very discrete tasks that would flow from that strategy work. Right now, the housing action plan is a bit of a hybrid document. It does include some of the strategic elements for further exploration in addition to specific tasks. But I think the opportunity exists there to do some of that identification of exactly who the parties are carrying out that work, resourcing and timing considerations for that, as well as that monitoring piece. So just to close, back to the stated recommendations of the report. So first and foremost, just that the report be received by council. Secondly, in item A, we have identified there that there is $50,000 already earmarked within the capital plan to update our growth management strategy. The request is for an additional $10,000 to expand the scope on that, as we've discussed around the finance projections and some of that workforce housing data. And then B, that we do explore those opportunities for additional data service with the Rural Housing Information System. I will note that in preliminary discussion, that idea has broader interest than Grey County. And so there may be a number of funding partners participating in that work. So what we've identified there is not a specific standalone ask for financing, but what we would suggest is that if there are costs associated, that would come from the General Housing Action Plan budget identified in the other reports. And then finally, just that we share the report with the member municipalities for information purposes. So that comprises my presentation. Happy through you, Mr. Warden, to take any questions or comments as council may have.
Thank you, Liz. Thank you very much. Any questions for Liz on that report? Councillor Eccles.
Thank you. And through you to Liz, you've mentioned a couple of times in there about the Ministry of Finance. How does that play such a adjusting role in what we're looking at here to make that?
Wonderful.
Just a little further explanation.
Great, thank you, Warden. Yes, so within the provincial planning statement 2024 that has been released and comes into effect on the 20th of this month, it has been identified that our growth management work is to be based from the Ontario population projections provided by the Ministry of Finance. And so we had done our growth management strategy and an update, I believe in 2021, using the former census data. That's where our growth management strategy currently pulls a lot of the information from. But now we're faced with this new policy direction that we should be using the Ministry of Finance numbers. The problem being that they identify a growth of 19,000 additional persons for Grey County over that same planning horizon. And so I think really the interest there is to understand, do we think that will materialize? Where do we think that might go? Is that reasonable? How do we allocate that amongst the lower tier municipalities for their purposes? Because it is kind of a black box number. And then there is also the need to do the employment forecasts that would go along with that. So the Ministry of Finance numbers focus on population, but we need to interpret that further into the employment forecasts as well. So little bit of a curveball, I think, just in terms of that policy direction of how we're meant to use those numbers. And our hope is to really understand whether or not we think those are valid. We do have some discretion to use alternate approaches, but we need to demonstrate and justify that. So that's how we anticipate that would feed into the growth management strategy with expanded scope.
Liz, does that answer the question, Councillor Eccles?
Yes, but the Ministry of Finance, along with a lot of information that comes out of Queen's Park, I'm glad we're going to do a lot of research on how much we can depend on those numbers being factual and truthful.
I guess we'll know in probably 20 or 30 years how accurate they were. Time always tells. Any other questions for Liz? Okay, not seeing it. Oh, Councillor Eccles.
Just one other little point. You talked about on the growth management and factors that fit into that, and public educated or public funded education. It was just how that's going to interact, but publicly funded healthcare, I think, is maybe even more fundamental to investigate than publicly funded education at this point in time. And I was just surprised that you didn't have that in there about publicly funded healthcare, given the facts of what threat that the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Finance are putting on our publicly funded healthcare in rural Ontario. Comment?
Great. Through you, Mr. Warden. So I guess where the publicly funded educational institutions, where that came from, in the new provincial planning statement, there is a section, a standalone section now regarding coordination. And so planning for housing as one of the items that we would be planning for is intended now to be coordinated. And I think always the hope was that it would be coordinated, but we have been very explicitly tasked with that coordination role. That was the list that was provided to us by the province. So they want to make sure that we are communicating with the school boards, that we're communicating with those post-secondary institutions around appropriate housing supply for students and staff and faculty. And so that is explicitly identified. Certainly take your point, Councillor, that that is an additional coordination piece. And I think Anne Marie's team has certainly been looking into that as it relates to kind of that left end of the housing spectrum as well. So, yeah.
Thank you, Liz.
Thank you.
Scott, do you have a comment, please?
Thank you, Mr. Warden. Just to build on what Liz just said with respect to that coordination, I think one of the things the county has been aiming for in recent years and on a go-forward basis is if we're investing public dollars into studying our growth needs and our growth pressures in the coming budgets, then we need to be communicating that with other public bodies, whether they be school boards or healthcare institutions as well. So I think if we do go forward with that update for the growth management strategy in 2025, as much as we need to be looking at the Ministry of Finance numbers and looking at the growth in each of your 9 member municipalities, we also need to be communicating those growth projections out to our other public bodies that operate provincial provincially mandated facilities in our area. So that's certainly something as staff we would commit to do on a go forward for sure.
Thank you, Scott. Any other questions? Councillor Body?
It's really a question following up from Scott. To Scott, do those institutions do their own growth studies, or do they only rely on the province? And is there a chance to do them together, thinking about education, thinking about health? They being government provincially funded, they maybe just rely on the government. But I wonder if they do their own studies and if there's opportunities to pull everybody together in Grey County and do it together.
Scott?
Sorry, I'll keep this brief, Mr. Warden. I've been told I had to come to the podium for this one. Through you to Councillor Body. It's a good question. I'm less familiar with some of the healthcare pieces. I know we've had numerous discussions with the school boards that operate within Grey, dating back 10 or 12 years when the ARC review process was quite hot and heavy. And I know on an annual basis, we go to a joint meeting and share our growth projections with the school board, and they're circulated on all of our plan of subdivision and condominium applications. We don't have that same current legislative requirement with the with local healthcare institutions. So I think that's something we could improve upon. The legislation represents the bare minimum, but as staff, we can certainly reach out and look at where they're getting their numbers, whether that's through the Ministry of Finance or through a separate study, and do the same with the school board or other institutions. I know we also work very closely with the health unit, and they've been great at sharing data, and we've had that reciprocal relationship for as long as I've been around here. So I don't know for sure if they do their own studies, but we can look further into that.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Ian. Any other questions? Call the question. All those in favor? That is carried. Thank you, Liz.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, it's 11 o'clock. Why don't we take a 5? Yeah, I see a lot of heads nodding. Why don't we take a recess for let's come back at let's aim for 11:05. So we'll recess. Thank you, Olivia. We'll call the meeting back to order. And the next item on the agenda is the report regarding Urban Road and Road Exchange Task Force recommendations. Would someone care to move the recommendation, please? Councillor Gregg and Councillor Mackey. So, Pat is here to take us through the report. I see he's got some knowledgeable backup with him. So, not that Pat isn't knowledgeable, because he certainly is. So, Pat, welcome. Floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. So we're here to talk about the Urban Rural Road Exchange Task Force. The task force has been doing a lot of good work, kind of advancing our road exchange and urban task or work. So it's one of those things where we've had a lot of very detailed discussions in the task force. So this report is mostly financial based, but we are going over a lot of background information because not everybody is sort of up to speed on all the stuff we've been talking about. And this has been going on for quite a long time. Before the task force ever started, we talked about a lot of these issues, but our discussion is kind of centered around the summary of recommendations for changes to the county road system, both urban and rural, with a focus on presenting financial aspects. So I'm going to go over a lot of maybe the kind of pros and cons and some of the reasons we're here in the first place. And Trevor is here to explain some of the finance, which can be quite complicated. We've been working quite hard with our finance folks, and they've all been going through a lot of these numbers, and there's a lot to discuss. So the plan in general, it kind of consists of two parts. So there's the urban exchanges and the rural exchanges. So the more scenarios we go through where you start working on the money, like everyone at the task force kind of seemed to think it was a good idea. You know, we're in the urbans, it's a multi-level government. It kind of makes things very complicated for urban and county staff to work on these jobs together. And then everyone can kind of look at the map, and you'll see the map that we put on your desks. And from a rural point of view, those exchanges sort of make sense to everybody as well. But the more we look at them, and when you start getting really into the numbers, we do look at this as a network. We can get numbers, which we will be talking to every municipality. But we haven't been trying to necessarily make it level for every individual party involved in this. We are looking at it as our county network. So that will be coming later in discussions. So this is just a little background on the urban county roads. So the 89 kilometers of urban roads in our system, so 10% of the county road system. So as I said, and we've shown that, you know, drawings in previous presentations where we would own the road and the storm sewer and the curb, and the municipalities would own the water and sanitary, sidewalk, some of those things, pedestrian facilities. So it just makes it quite complicated in requiring coordination. Just underground infrastructure, everything deteriorates at a different rate. You get that call from a resident saying the road's in bad shape. Maybe that's because we're waiting for the underground to be done. And it just, it's hard for the public to understand different levels of government owning different pieces of the same road. So as the road authority, the county would be responsible for, we issue encroachment permits, utility placement, facilities for cyclists, storm sewer maintenance, road maintenance, right-of-way issues like setbacks and signs and speed limits. And that is always a little point of frustration for the public too. They phone the municipality, and the municipality might say, well, you'll have to phone the county because that's a county road. Well, but it's in Owen Sound. Well, yeah, but it's a county, you know, people really struggle with that whole setup. But it doesn't really make a lot of sense unless you're kind of familiar with it. So this was how the idea started back in our official plan and the master plan of the benefits of local management of your urban roads. Just timely responses to issues. So quite frequently, maybe the municipality has a development they're bringing forward. They have to get the county to the table too. And our policies might not be exactly what they want to do. So then we'll end up maybe bickering about the county policy versus the municipal policy. And it just ends up being kind of a bit of a tug of war that maybe doesn't need to happen if the local municipality was in charge of their own roads. Because point two there is very important. You understand your local municipal needs that the county might not. We might not be there all the time. Community engagement, it's probably easier to engage if you're one entity. Cost-effective budgeting, there's a lot of wrangling with budgeting. Your budget has to go to our budget if we're doing a capital job together. Since we're paying together, then there has to be a consultant. You have to figure out who pays percentages of that. So it is just make things just a little bit more complicated. So obviously local conditions would be easier if you were just taking care of your own roads. Local control allows for a tailored approach. So here is the list, and it's in the report as well, of the urban roads to be transferred. So why we picked those primary settlement areas, those are the areas that have water and sanitary. So that's where it really gets complicated with the multiple servicing issues. And a lot of those cases, we have storm sewers where we would be a middle cog, say, in a very large storm sewer system. It's not very often we actually control the outlet. You know, all the initial storm sewer will come from small subdivision type things into our line, and our line goes into a bigger line out to an outlet somewhere that we might not control. So those primary settlement areas seem to be the biggest stumbling block, and they have the most vibrant communities that probably would benefit most from some self-governance. And then we added some other secondaries in there which have either one or the other. And there's kind of our bigger communities there, the secondary areas. So this figure is reflecting our annual maintenance for urban roads. So I think in Owen Sound's case, they do the urban winter maintenance for us and we pay them. In every other case, we would be doing the winter maintenance. So the thing to remember about this figure or this number is, so the county would save some money if we weren't doing all this urban maintenance. But that being said, winter maintenance is so dependent on equipment, staffing, your union contracts, maybe. It's not like you're gonna go out and buy a truck next week and staff it with 3 people and you're gonna start all your winter maintenance every morning at 3 a.m. So we know there's gonna be a big transition of urban maintenance, winter maintenance especially. Probably the summer, everyone could maybe limp through their own summer maintenance. But with winter maintenance, we know there's gonna be a transition period. However that works. So a big basis of this report is just, we're going in, and it's coming up here soon. But we'll be going in to do annual or contracts for winter maintenance. And whether we do it for a while, maybe eventually the municipality decides they want to do it on their own. But this represents kind of a savings for the county if we weren't responsible for all this winter maintenance. So here is where we're into this maintenance and funding agreement. So this is where we'd have an updated urban maintenance agreement for each municipality. So which we have now. We have them with Bruce and Dufferin and Simcoe. And they're, generally Owen Sound as well. Generally quite simple for us to do. You each have your own level of responsibility, and it's very clear in an agreement who's responsible for what. So there would be part of this transition agreement is coming up as well. It's just detailing annual payments over the next 10 years. So that's to help pay for some capital and some urban maintenance. And again, the more we kind of peel back the onion, the more everybody is in a really different situation, right? All the urban municipalities are quite different from each other, from staffing to facilities to even, the weather they get or the level of service maybe that they would desire. We are fairly consistent in our level of service, and right now we're looking at, this is all dependent on our agreements with everybody. It's going to have to come back through this council, but maybe a target date of winter maintenance for the fall of 25 that the urbans would be downloaded. So I'm going to get into the next slide is about how the urban transition funding is calculated, and Trevor's going to talk about that.
Good morning, everyone. So the urban transition funding basically is the amount that we're looking to provide the municipalities to deal with some of the capital costs for those roads that they'd be taking on. Where this comes from and how it's originated is as part of our capital program. We have roughly 16.5 million that is spent every year on capital projects from a levy and funding source perspective. So OSIF and gas tax, which is CCBF now today. And what we've done is we looked at it from a perspective of the amount of roads we're transferring roughly equate to about 10.4% of the replacement costs of the total system. So if we have the 16 million, we figured 10.4 of that on an annual basis should be spent on those roads that would be part of the urban transfers. And effectively that money we could allocate as part of this transition funding. And that basically allows it so that, us as the county, we still have enough money to maintain the roads that we're keeping, but also still proportionally giving away the amount that we feel represents the urban road sections. One of the items that come in this too is a lot of the project costs you see here, again, and Pat alluded to it, most of the capital projects are split roughly 50-50. Sometimes it kind of ranges between 40 and 60%, whether that's to the county or to the municipality. So some of these costs here, you may see that, might be 2 million. Really, that's representing $4 million worth of work. It's just, this would be the Grey County costs to those projects. The other half typically comes from the municipalities for those jobs. So that just gives a bit more context as to the actual values here. One of the other things you may notice is we do have a transition in the last 4 years, and that's really just so that the funding just doesn't come to a sharp end, and then it's just all of a sudden at year 11, bam, you have to peel or figure out the full amount or where that might come from. And really, the other thing we'd just point out is the amount right now. It says 2,060,000 in 2025, and then it goes up. So what we've done is we've allocated that based on kind of our 10-year projections. But really that amount, if the projections in the future don't follow or the amounts that were allocated as part of levy, if they don't follow the projections, obviously the payments would adjust and it would all really come down to that initial 10.4. So whether they go up or down, basically as the years go on, those numbers will fluctuate depending on what the county has for capital spending.
And I guess I'll just mention one more thing, because I've heard Mary Lou say it enough. So this is not a budget, right? This is a projection, and depending on what our capital is, that would be what that number is based on. So this is going to get approved every year, you know, as part of our yearly capital program. There'll be that figure in there saying what is going for the urban transition funding to the municipalities. So the next steps, and this is kind of the key to the whole process, is negotiating new urban road agreements with transition plans, including schedules, funding, maintenance, support. And this is where we get back to everybody is so different. Some people are taking on maybe quite a bit of urban expense, maybe. Some are benefiting quite a bit from some rural transfers. But everybody is sort of in a different spot. And then we are still discovering things now. We had a meeting with Hanover yesterday, and I know we're not spending a lot of time talking about the bridges. But there's, you know, bridges in Hanover that are larger than the 6-meter span that fall under the old bridge bylaw that I've spent way too much time talking about. But they're there. So, you know, they have to be addressed too. So nobody wants to get themselves in a condition in a spot where they can't provide funding to keep their roads adequate, and we're the same. So that's kind of what we've been working through, trying to make a fair deal for everyone. So I don't know if we want to keep going on to rural roads. Or is there?
Councillor Nielsen?
Thank you, Warden Milne. Just on the urban road exchange. I understand the logic for the municipalities having kind of controlled their own destiny within your urban centers, and how you kind of made a good point that each municipality will be affected differently, and some more significantly than others. This is going to have to go to lower tier municipal tables and made agreements. If we have support for some and not support for others, are we determined to continue the process and move forward with those agreements that we can get? Is the county interested in seeing some and not others? Is it an all or nothing thing? You kind of help me understand what the premise of this moving forward looks like, as we may or may not get support from the lower tiers.
I'll try and answer that question, Councillor Nielsen. So through you, Mr.
Just, sorry, Randy, to interrupt. There is some technical difficulties with our cameras. So if we need a staff member to respond, they need to come to the podium for the cameras to, we want to see you, Randy, and everybody else that is responding. So.
Thank you for the reminder, Warden. So with respect to, obviously we want to, if subject to direction, obviously from committee of the whole today, we want to have those discussions with each municipalities to understand some of those nuances, some of those differences as Pat indicated, and bring that information back to the task force and to council. Depending on what we hear, we might hear that, you know, some are supportive of what is being proposed with the transition funding that's being recommended or proposed. We might hear from some that might not be enough funding. We might hear some that will still require maintenance support from the county. What does that potentially look like? As you heard Pat indicate, the nuance of boundary road bridges and how does that come into the framework? So we think through some of those further discussions, we'll be able to bring that information back to the task force and committee and understand what those nuances are and what other considerations we might have to look at in order to support each of us. As Pat indicated, we don't want to stick one municipality or any municipality with something that they won't be able to maintain going forward. At the same time, we also want to make sure that it's balanced so that we can look after the roads that are under the county's jurisdiction. So we want to come up with a balanced framework. This is our first crack at what we think might be a balanced framework, but until we have some of those further discussions, we may have some further information then to bring back to the task force and the council to discuss further.
Thanks, Randy. Any other questions regarding the urban? I mean, we'll have more opportunity later, but if anybody has a question now. Councillor Eccles.
Thank you. And I'm just wondering on the kilometer lengths, and not surprisingly, Hanover and West Gray share a number of county roads. Obviously in Hanover, it's predominantly urban, but on the other side that we share with it, in West Gray, it's rural. I guess through the negotiation, how are we coming up with who gets what or what is where? I guess is where I'm asking.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Warren. This is another thing that came up as we kind of started crunching some of these numbers. There's a few examples like that. There's, the Hanover on one side, West Gray on the other. Hanover has a peculiar boundary that there's spots that'd be Hanover on one side and Brockton on the other. On the east side of Owen Sound, Owen Sound's on one side and Meaford's on the other. So right now we've counted those as say a half a road as far as kilometers go. But there'd be some more agreements to work out with that as well. In fact, we met with Bruce this week, and we share winter maintenance with Bruce. So I don't think we'd get to the point, this is our discussion we had with Bruce, we wouldn't say that it has to be Hanover and Bruce that makes a winter maintenance agreement. It would probably still flow through us, and we'd be doing the winter maintenance in Hanover for the foreseeable future. So there's a lot of those little nuances, yeah, where the road ownership is stranger than you'd think it would be.
And that's something to be discussed further north on the county line in Elmwood as well too. Because surprisingly, it's one of the few secondary villages that's not in here at this point in time.
Yeah, and there's a few that aren't in there that are kind of borderline. Elmwood would be one, maybe Kilsyth would be another. But yeah, we'd be working out agreements for those. But I think the ones that maybe aren't in here would still stay under county control as far as road maintenance goes. Same as it is now.
Any other questions for now? Okay, let's carry on with the rural roads, Pat, please.
All right, so on to the rurals. So as we know, the Transportation Master Plan was completed in 2015. But these were outstanding issues, right? So some road exchanges, how do they happen? How do they happen that they're palatable for everyone? And it's not like, oh, let me forward that. It's not like we're kind of making these up. These have gone through the task force. They were in the OP, a bunch of them, they were in the original TMP. So they conform to the county official plan supporting growth, support the heavy uptick of tourism and agriculture and resource uses, trucking companies. These kind of came out, a lot of these exchanges came out of those discussions during the TMP. So you'll see the map on your desk that kind of shows the 4 roads. And there they are listed there, Southgate Side Road 11, the Town Line, Concession 5 and 6 in Derby, and Concession 12. And in some cases, there's the exchange of 14, 25, and 9. In the example of Concession 5 and 6, that would just be coming up to the county from Chatsworth and Georgian Bluffs. So we've got that required construction here on the right. That is, we've just started doing some scenarios on if those roads came up to the county, how would they fit into our capital 10-year plan? Because some of them need urgent work or early work. Some of them need work quite later in their life cycle. So like every job, well, I'll let Trevor get into that. We get the financial part, but we know that some of them require work sooner than later, and some of them are in great enough shape to be a county road right now. So the next step, the rural transfer. So again, work with the member municipalities just to talk about how a rural exchange would look. And public meetings. That's the other thing. We spent a lot of time on this. We haven't got a lot of feedback from the public yet. They're not necessary. We haven't had a whole bunch of public meetings yet. There's some civic addressing changes that are really going to affect individual residents. There's probably potential property acquisition, maybe potential widening. and just timing a reconstruction. So I don't think it's quite, you know, as different as it used to be, where if it was a county road, someone's looking at a map, they see a big, you know, County Road 5, and that's what they're going to take. Now we find people's GPS is sending them on whatever road. And in a lot of cases, they're on a road that probably should be a higher level of service, or maybe a wider platform, or less vertical changes. So that's how we think that the rural transfers work so well. It's kind of the road network that should be, is what we feel. Maybe I'll let Trevor talk about the financial part here.
So basically we went through the 10-year plan, and what we did originally, kind of in the early stages of this, we looked at each of these roads that are part of the road transfers, looked at the type of work that would be required. So whether that's property acquisition, utility relocations, reconstruction, different preventative treatments for some of the roads that are in better condition to get them further along in their stage before full reconstruction as well. And really that's to, as best we could, spread the kind of spending out in those early stages, so it's not just all right away. And what we ended up doing, so if we look at this left here, we have kind of projected costs for each of the first 10 years. Then we have an estimated development charge funding requirement. So with that, we kind of took a ballpark, a pretty conservative estimate on what could potentially be development charges. Again, our development charge bylaw doesn't get updated till 2027, so we couldn't start collecting until 27 at the earliest. But what that does mean is some of these estimates, they're all based on what I would say is about a 30 or 40% development costs or charge costs would be allocated to the projects. Historically, with this type of construction, we've seen numbers more like 60 and 70% covered by development charges. So again, being conservative, we kept those down, and ultimately they may help us, but at the same time, adding a bunch of additional development charge projects just increases the development charge, and then that comes with other complications as well from a community standpoint. So then we more or less calculated the estimated amount of new levy funding required, which is kind of that A plus B column. And then the C column is our the rural roads that would be part of the transfer. So those are the works that we've got in our 10-year plan that are currently going to be planned for those roads that are being transferred. So again, those would no longer be costs from the county's perspective, and then would go to the municipality side. And then, well, whether they do the same treatment that we would have done, like we may have a full reconstruction, whereas it might be that because it's a lower level service and you maintain it at a difference, you may choose to do a smaller treatment or a less expensive one. So again, we are kind of looking at from county's perspective and the cost that we would no longer have, but whether those necessarily reflect the same opinions of the municipalities. And then finally, that gives us kind of a net levy impact each year. Now, again, the way we've kind of done that at the bottom, you can see there's an annual of just about 2.1 million. And really that's the intent, is to set our 10-year capital to account for a 2.1 million effectively on the capital to cover the costs. And then what would end up happening is when we go through the 10-year plan process and we integrate these jobs, we'll prioritize them depending in conjunction with the 10-year plan itself, because some of these may alter and move slightly just because of the competing priorities of our current 10-year plan. But ultimately, the 2.1 million, we figure from a level playing field, level stand field, it's kind of a one-term thing, and then it's in there and should cover the costs of the rural transfers as we go forward. So then we're not dealing with annual large fluctuations in budget.
So then all these the individual numbers roll up into this financial summary slide. So there at the top is that the operating budget reduction, which is basically our savings and maintenance at the county. There's that 2 million, just over 2 million of the urban transition funding, which would be going to the municipalities. So basically the urban transfers, would save us $1 million under the current configuration. And the rural transfers, we'd have that 60,000 figure is from some rural roads that we're taking on. So we'd be providing maintenance for those. And then the 2 million for the that will cost us the number Trevor just went over. So basically taking on some of these rural roads would cost us about 2 million a year in our capital. So basically, we figure right now, you know, that's 1.1 million additional funding we would need a year, or funding we'd allocate to kind of make this as a package exchange. So now some of these numbers, the winter maintenance, I don't know, it's one of those things when we start negotiating, I'm sure, you know, there's things that people will say, well, we can't quite do that. Could you do this? You know, so I don't see that number necessarily going down, maybe, unless everyone wants to do more work. But that's kind of the number we're at now. So that's kind of our starting point. We did want to get to a number that we thought was at least palatable. If that number was 5 million right off the bat, you know, how much farther do you go? But we feel like it's a relatively reasonable number, just because of the benefits of the exchange and the urban transfers.
Thank you, Pat. Thank you, Trevor. Perhaps questions on the rural transfers. We had a few questions. I'll give an opportunity for the say, okay, Councillor Nielsen.
Thank you, Warden Milne. A question for staff in terms of, this is, I respect and understand where the starting point here. The transition for urban is downloading and supporting with funds. Why is there no discussion from, if we're uploading roads to the county, looking for a similar kind of program where lower tier municipalities would obviously be taking capital projects off their books, but maybe support the county with the transfer funding the way we're doing the urban one?
Randy? Randy?
Thank you for the question, Councilor Nielsen, through your warden. At this stage, we haven't investigated that particular option. What we've identified, or what's been presented to the task force and now to obviously all of committee of the whole, is a model that we think would work if it's done in a packaged way, and without compromising our overall capital program for our county roads that we are already responsible for maintaining and upgrading over the coming years. We've crunched the numbers, you know, many different ways, but focused on this particular model of there being an urban transition fund for the urban transfers, and how we can incorporate at least some of the immediate needs from a rural roads transfer perspective, and how we'd be able to tackle that. With the exchanges too, there are roads that we are transferring as part of that. So that's part of why I think part of the rationale at this stage is that we're giving something in exchange, typically for those rural roads. So we're taking on some roads, the county is taking on some roads, and the member municipality is in turn taking on some roads. Whether or not they're, you know, different shape is a different question. But in terms of there's an exchange versus the urban roads, it's just a straight transfer. If that makes sense. So there's not an exchange road coming back to the county that we're now having to take on. So there's some savings on the urban side from a capital maintenance perspective. And on the rural side, there's a bit of an exchange, at least in terms of roads that we'd be transferring and uploading both to the county and transferring to the local municipality.
I think it's worth remembering too, that that whole exercise is going to be a little bit like your estate to your children. This is not everybody's going to get an equal share, but everybody will get a fair share. So just in broad terms, keep that in mind. Did you have a follow-up, Councillor Nielsen?
Thank you, Warden Milne. I think my follow-up is just, we're looking at the capital projects needed for the rural exchange, and I respect what we're trying to do here. We're building the networks that we're looking at. Where's the growth coming? We want to have more traffic on county roads that benefits everybody across the county. I'm fully on board with the project and the concept. What I'm saying is, if a lower tier municipality has capital projects or capital costs for roads, the same way that we are going to fund by saving costs and operations in the in the urban exchange. I'm wondering how come we're not looking for a compensation from the lower tiers? If have asset management where we've been putting money aside from a lower tier, that's where my logic is in that balanced approach. Here, we sit as county council members. We have to look at what's equal for our lower tiers. I appreciate that we're not trying to be the province and just saying, here, figure it out. But we also have to have our county hat on and saying, does this make sense from a county perspective? What are we taking on and what does the future look like for the county when we consider some of the projects? So that's the mindset that I'm going into this discussion.
I think I could speak to that once I actually registered what your question was. I had some stuff spinning up here, but anyway, I know what you're saying. Yeah, so there is some I don't know how to put it, like some rural winners in this current arrangement. So that being said, we know with our agreement when we get together to meet about agreements and funding, again, highlighting more differences. Southgate paved the road we'd be taking last year. We might put a top lift on it, but they did pave it. Other roads that we're taking haven't been paved in a long time. So I know what you mean. Like it is, we didn't really investigate that. But again, as we start seeing who's, we are looking at it as a network, but there is maybe some funding that a municipality that was really benefiting doesn't get, maybe. Like maybe that counteracts the urban, someone really benefiting in the urban, maybe they don't, or rural, maybe they don't get quite as much. I don't know. So I think that would come down into those agreements and discussions. Yeah.
Thanks, Pat. Councillor Gray.
Thank you. And through you, Warden, I thought I'd just maybe pass along a little bit of the discussion at the committee meeting. Certainly concession 12 in West Gray and the requisite improvements for the bridges, it makes West Gray a winner. But we've had discussion in terms of a road like that. It comes alongside the higher level of service and standard construction from the county that's going to really be impactful in terms of the gross costs. One part of the discussion that we have had was the county standard. We would optimally like to see 100-foot right-of-ways. The lower tier has a 66-foot. Can engineering staff work within the smaller footprints, the smaller right-of-ways where possible, perhaps, to kind of bring a little bit more balance to the potential costs of road improvement. So it gets more expensive to go to the 100-foot, definitely. Are there some alternatives that can still be examined that would squeeze that gap a little bit? So just in regards to your question, we have had some discussion in terms of that imbalance that would seemingly exist between what asset management plans would indicate at the county level and that much smaller number, but still a number in the lower tier, but it comes with a much lower standard of care and construction.
Thank you, sir. Any other questions? Okay, I presume you have, or is that the entirety of the presentation? That's it? Any other questions? Kim, Paul, go ahead. Councillor McQueen.
Thank you, Mr. Warden, and thanks for the discussion. Bottom line is budget. So that's something we'll have to move that toward the discussion when we get to budget. I see there were minutes there. Just from a lower tier as of yesterday from the municipality of Grey Highlands. I don't know if those that are policed by OPP got a letter. Our policing costs were up 21%. There seemed to be a backplay of, I guess, wages and stuff. And also we got a reduction of our OCIF funding by $100,000. It's a 15% decrease. So budget is budget is budget, and there's one taxpayer. So, more investigation, more discussion. But I know we had a tough budget year last year, Mr. Warden. And certainly from just a snapshot of Grey Highlands, and I'm sure those that are policed by OPP will get that letter real soon if you haven't got it last Friday. It comes down to the bottom line is what our taxpayers can afford and all that stuff. So we can move forward, but there is, there's a need and there's a want. And I think to a certain degree, and maybe the urban setting, it's the need more and more so. But from the rural side, it's maybe a want, desire, but I think it still comes down to that budget number. So I'll leave it at that, Mr. Warden.
Thank you, Counselor. You're absolutely right. Any other questions? Okay. Oh, sorry, Jim. Counselor Nielsen.
Thank you, Warden Mailman. I'm not trying to belabor this. A question I do have though, when we're looking at the motion that's on the floor, that it does suggest that we implement a $1.148 million increase to the 2025 budget. This negotiation is going to be taking place throughout 2025. Is there logic to have the agreements to start January of 2026 so that we can have the negotiations and not change our budget this year, given that the negotiations may or may not take place, but have the agreements in place for 2026 and then have that in our budget? Just if there's background from staff on terms of why implement the increase today if we don't know where the negotiations land us, because this could be significantly different.
Yeah, we've talked about that with finance as well, that even if the transfers happened in fall 25 for winter maintenance, the construction, rural construction is not happening in 2025, right? So we would probably phase it in over a couple of years to get to that number, whether it goes 25, 26. We kind of feel 20, we want to start winter maintenance at the start of the winter season. But as far as probably the rural construction, maybe, May of 26 would be a good time to start it. We could paint the new roads. We could make the changes we need to make, maybe, start fixing the things that we really see need to be done. So I think that, yes, that 1.148 could very easily go over a couple of years. I don't know if you want to talk about that maybe.
There we are. Good morning, Council. In follow-up to a couple of points that have been made here this morning, I heard in the discussion a reference to the member municipalities passing a resolution about supporting the acceptance of the urban cross sections. And if that in fact is the wish of council, that each member municipality is going to take their own decision about whether or not to move forward with this model or accept this model, then I think it would be perhaps most appropriate that clause 3 is struck from this resolution, and then to give staff time to have those conversations with all of the member municipalities and then come back to council with what the plan can look like. As Pat and Trevor and everyone has mentioned, the plan that's before you now is really premised on the idea that the urbans and the rurals would both go. And if that plan needs to change substantially, then I think that will really have an impact on what the numbers look like. And so you might want to take a decision at that time. If we proceed as we are now, I'm thinking we may get into a reconsideration situation later on, and whether or not you want to do that. But as it stands, it sounds like there's a strong case that the 2025 budget number probably is not as accurate as we would like it to be. Thanks.
Councillor DeBreen.
Thank you. Through you, Warden, to CAO Wingrove's comment, would it make sense just to add a word consider levy increase? Would that negate any need to reconsider at a future time? That way, if it is something that staff wish us to pursue, it can still be incorporated.
I'll look to Mary Lou maybe to make a comment about that. I'm thinking though that we're simply not, I just don't see that there's enough time to get all of your council's deliberations completed and then to get feedback back to the county in time for that to happen in this budget year. But I think Mary Lou can speak to that better than I.
Through you, Mr. Warden. Kim is absolutely correct. So we have two budget meetings scheduled for December 6th and 13th. Staff in finance, we're working with departments right now, doing like the final looks at their budgets and furiously paddling. So in order to have all of that complete and come back to us, there just simply isn't enough time, not in order to meet the budget timelines. And with that, whatever else and the many other things that are going on in your municipalities and the time to digest that and for your staff to evaluate and come back and give you informed decisions. So my recommendation would be that you leave, the report is received and the funding model was presented. And that staff be directed to negotiate agreements and remove the effect date. And that then there's an update brought back to council. So I'd take out the 2025 budget implication of the $1,148,300. And however, Tara would and Sarah would wordsmith that.
So might I suggest that simply the report be received and that staff be directed to negotiate new road agreements with the lower tiers? But if the second clause has that the funding model presented for the urban and road transfers be approved. We don't want to suggest that they be approved, but we want them to be received and they're in the report. So, I mean, I'm being rather economical with the words just by saying receive the report as it is, because the funding model's in there. Okay, I'm going to ask Tara to put the motion as Councillor DeBreen is considering moving, and Councillor Eccles will second it. But I'm going to wait for Councillor DeBreen.
Just for clarity, it's an amendment to the main motion. Okay, thank you. I would be inclined to move it.
I'll confirm that once we get it on the screen. So if this is any indication of how this is going to be complicated, it's going to be. What's that, Nate? Yes, yeah, we did. Okay, Tara's going to read the amendment to the main motion.
So the proposed motion is that the motion be amended to strike clause 3 in its entirety. Insert the words in principle in clause 2 regarding the road transfer funding model to be approved in principle only. And that clause 4 be amended to strike to take effect fall 2025. So there's no timeline associated with it at this time.
Councillor DeBreen is okay with moving that amendment. I had asked Councillor Eccles if he was going to second. I thought I saw your hand in the air, so if you don't want to, that's fine. He will second that amendment. All right. Any discussion on the amendment itself? I'll call the question. All those in favor of the amendment? That is carried. So now we're back to the main motion as amended, which has already been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion on the motion as amended? Councillor Body.
Maybe coming to the table late, but I think Pat started when he was a child in this. My recollection is that Road rationalization started with Warden McKinley, if I'm not mistaken. It would have been 2012, 2014, somewhere in there. There's been a lot of work put into this, and none of us are going to be 100% happy ever. But in the long run, think about all the things that we are moving up and down as we've done as this council. Transferring responsibility up to the county, down from the county, et cetera. And this is one more thing that you got to think about the whole picture, I think, is part of it. We all have to give up something to get something, and we all get something when we give up something, and not everything is ever going to be perfect. So I hope that this doesn't get into long negotiations with our lower tiers. We probably could ask lower tiers that are gaining something to contribute up, but then we'll never get the agreement that we need on this. This is something that, again, it's been 12 years. It's time to move it forward, both urban and rural, and get it done. And we look forward to when we review the waste management. I'm kidding. And my only other comment with Paul's, of course, there's always other possibilities except for OPP costing when they go up that high. There's other municipalities that have good police forces that you could join. Thanks.
It's always a pleasure to hear grandstanding from the city of Owen Sound. Yeah, from everybody. That's true enough. All right. I think we've watered it down to the point where we can continue to work on this, yet we're not committing to anything, which is always the goal, right? Any further discussion or questions on the motion as amended? I'll call the question. All those in favor? That is carried. Thank you very much. Our final report this morning, aside from the consent item, which we'll come to next, is a report on energy management software. And Rebecca is here to take us through that report this morning. Someone care to move acceptance of that, please? Councillor McKay, seconded by Councillor Nielsen. Thank you very much. Rebecca, good morning. Welcome.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me again here today to talk about our energy management software proposal. So the project that we're looking to do is to get accurate and up-to-date energy costs and consumption from our utility bills. If we get the data from our individual buildings, we're able to analyze their energy performance, which allows us to improve that performance. And if we're getting accurate totals from all the buildings, we can get a sense of our full costs as well as our full consumption, which is very helpful in building our greenhouse gas inventories and not needing to get an external consultant to do that for us. So currently the system involves manual entry, which is approximately 1,200 bills that is done by the finance department, manually typing numbers into a spreadsheet. This is not only time consuming, but despite their being very diligent about it, errors just do occur just with that volume of manual entry. So we're looking for a system that will facilitate as well, being able to connect with other tools for analysis, reporting, and data visualization. And these are tools that we already have. We already have either through our software that we already pay for, or it's just we already have it available. So when we get some good energy data, it's going to help us to make informed decisions about energy management, budgeting, building commissioning, as well as capital projects. So the program that we're recommending is UDAS, which is Utility Data Acquisition Service, and it's offered by a company called ECAN, which is a Canadian-based organization. And the reason this one is being recommended is that unlike most platforms, it allows us to start with that data capture piece and really capturing the utility bills. Most platforms, you have to buy the data analysis platform, and then they will sell you the data capture and real-time monitoring and kind of as add-ons. And those platforms, you're locked into a closed system. So once you buy that data analysis, the bill capture service will only work and will only put data into that platform that you've bought. So they're creating a system where you're really locked into only using tools that are available through that one system. The UDAS program allows you to capture the bills, and then it will allow you to export it into any number of different software. So it can kind of gives us more flexibility going forward. Now, I know this is super duper tiny, so apologies. It is in the report. But the idea is that this program will take utility data, and that can be in an Excel file, it can be in a PDF bill document, it can be a consolidated bill, so you have several buildings in one file, or it can split them apart, it can put them together. It goes into this software and it will give you accurate totals as those bills come in real time so that you know exactly what's going on. And then it will allow you to export it into an energy management software. So if at some point down the line we decide we need one, we can export it into those. We're not recommending that we need one of those yet, because we think we can do a lot with the tools we already have. It will also integrate with an accounting system if finance decides they want to do that. And it also exports to a number of different formats that we're using. So you'll see the ones that we're primarily interested in are RedScreen, which is a tool we already have for utility bill analysis, as well as Portfolio Manager, which is the one that's required by the province for our broader public sector reporting. And obviously Excel, which allows us to move it into things like Power BI, which we already have, which facilitates data visualization. So these are the things that we were looking for. We've done the checklist with our IT department. They have no concerns. It's going to work. It doesn't require manual entry. It can track a number of different utilities such as gas, electricity, water, and other utilities. We'll have timely access to all the bill data. It comes into the system as those bills arrive at the county. The export formats, as I was saying, work for what we need. It can work with those consolidated bills when we have several entries in the same bill, or it can also consolidate several bills. So if we're looking at our single family housing, we can sort of group those together so that we're not paying for individual bills. It allows us to import historical data so we compare to baselines, for example, our 2018 baseline that we have for Going Green and Gray, so we can track changes over time. And staff training and customer support is available. So these softwares are based on the number of bills or accounts you want to track. So this is what we're suggesting right now. So we have 18 non-housing buildings in our portfolio, and we're suggesting that we track electricity, gas, and water for those buildings. We have good, because staff are primarily managing those buildings, we have good control over all of those aspects of our operations. For the MURBs are multi-unit residential buildings. These are a lot of our social housing buildings. We feel like we have good control over gas and electricity because we do manage the building envelope as well as the mechanical systems. We don't have good control over water because that's primarily determined by what the residents are doing. So we're not suggesting that we try and track and manage that at this point. We also have a large number of single family detached homes. And this is ones we get individual gas and electric bills for each of those. What we're suggesting is that we consolidate those into groupings kind of by address. So we have ones on Alpha Street, ones in Westmount, ones in Meaford and sorry, I've got the list somewhere. There's really 7 different groupings that would make sense. And the reason for this consolidation is really to save on costs, because we don't want to be paying for individual bills for 171 different buildings. It's just cost prohibitive. And we also don't have capacity to really examine individual houses and track energy usage and try to manage that. At this point, we're trying hard to manage those non-housing buildings and the MURBs as our priority. So we don't have the capacity to manage the energy anyway. So we're looking to put those together so we're getting accurate totals. We have the ability to go back in there and dig into the data if we have to, but we don't want to be tracking each of those 171 houses individually. So the subscription cost, it's based on, if you look at the previous one, we've got 126 as our estimated number of bills. Plus or minus, if we add a building or some buildings don't have gas, so there's a little bit of variation we're still working out. But that's a total of 1560 monthly bills. So that's sort of just multiplying that by 12 because most bills are monthly. Which is our 5850 is our annual subscription cost, and it is an ongoing subscription, so that we would be putting that into our climate change operating budget going forward, as well as there is an initial 2,500 initial setup fee. Now, this is compared to some of the other platforms we've looked at. There can be between sort of 2 and 3 times that for the annual subscription, and sort of between 5 and 8 times that for the initial setup, just because they are American and more complicated, and they do have additional functionality, but it's not functionality that we think we need right now, and we are advising against paying for things that we don't think we need to use right now. So that's how the project implementation would work. This is going to help us with our broader public sector recording that is required under OREG 2523, as well as our ECDM planning, which we have just did this past year, but we will continue to, unless the regulations change, we're going to have to continue to do that every 5 years. And it's going to make that a lot easier for us going forward. Finance staff will no longer have to do that manual entry. Staff will work with IT to work this project into their 2025 work plan. We have spoken with them about how that might fit in. The finance team will continue to their process as usual. One of the nice things about this platform is it doesn't require any process changes from the finance team, so they can continue just to operate as they usually do. And then with this accurate and up-to-date data, staff can make good decisions about energy management, budgeting, building commissioning, and capital projects. So that's our plan.
Thank you, Rebecca. It was important for me, at least, to see that Jody's happy. Any questions? Councillor Eccles.
I guess going forward, I just don't quite understand why it would be in the climate action plan budget. More of a financial thing, is to help finance, track these bills, I understand, but it just going forward, you said it would be in the climate action budget. Just doesn't seem to be a fit to me.
Mary Lou's gonna provide an answer.
We have a number of software allocated to different budgets. So housing, for example, pays for Yardi, which is a property management software. The 3 homes pay for Point Click Care, which has a financial plus a clinical component. There's no prescribed place for it to be. If the department that is most using the software and is responsible for the software wants it in their budget, we certainly don't have any objections, the same as transportation has software, et cetera.
Randy?
Just to add some further comments, as what Mary Lou indicated. For this, in terms of why we're recommending the climate operations budget on a go-forward basis, Kieran, who's here today, is our climate change data coordinator. He's been looking at all of our energy consumption, looking for opportunities to save on energy costs throughout our buildings corporately. And so that's where we see the most use and the best use of this data and information going forward. No doubt, all of our building operators, all the various departments will be able to use this information as well to help track some of their energy usage. But we see some of that, the bulk of the work being done by Kieran on a go-forward basis to be able to track this information and look for those opportunities to save on energy costs.
Thank you, Randy. But okay, Mr. Eccles?
Not really, it's a financial tool. And I guess we're just adding something into climate action. I still just don't see it. I think if it's going to be financial, you said, it's finance, it puts all of these bills in, it puts everything in, and helps out the finance. Yeah. Climate action will be using some of this data, I don't, transportation, maybe trying to figure out what better way to light our intersection signs or something else as well too, but you can look at, I just think it should be where it is used, and the use is in finance. Throwing it into some other place, I don't grasp it, still don't.
So I can understand your point, but are you ready to die on that hill today, or you want to let it go?
To Councillor McQueen, everything's in budget. We'll look at it and we'll die at the budget day in December.
Okay, any other questions on the report? I'll call the question. All those in favor, sorry, Councillor Mackey, sorry.
Thanks, Mr. Warden. I certainly understand that there may be cost savings. Have the departments been able to ascertain what those potential savings would be with the yearly investment of 5280? 58, 5,800 and something? Thank you. I want to make sure we're getting bang for our buck, I guess at the end of the day.
Yeah, excellent question. Yeah, so it's potential energy savings that we're looking at. Studies from other municipalities and other places have shown that you can achieve between 3 and 5% of your energy costs simply by looking at behavioral changes. So making sure things are operating as they should be, that things are turned off when they should be, and that the things are set to the right settings. Just yesterday, the team was at Sydenham campus and made a number of changes to the building automation system, which we hope are going to reduce our peak demands and move forward. Now, we haven't been able to do a lot of that work because we don't have the data. We don't know where the problems are. And if we don't know where the problems are, we can't go solve them. So once we've gotten that information, we'd be happy to come back and sort of show where the savings have been achieved. But until we know where the data is, the specific use case, we can only sort of point to other people who've done it and achieved savings. But until we know where, what we've got going on now, and we're comparing it to what's going on later, we don't know unless we have the data to track that kind of information, be able to share with you what the savings have been. But we estimate that it will do that.
Thanks, Mr. Warden. Yeah, that would be great if we have the information back to prove that this investment is actually worthwhile. So, and it'll likely take a year or two, but just to make sure that it does come back, so we're able to analyze that in the future would be wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Call the question. All those in favor? Oh, sorry, Councillor McQueen, sorry.
Just to raise my flag a little higher. Just to follow up, does that data help us as a county apply for grants? So.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and they're also looking for, like, we can get incentive if we can demonstrate that we have implemented energy conservation, and this is how we do our measurement and verification for that.
So I don't know what grants are out there and what's available, but obviously if you're a carbon-based use of heating, and a lot more people are going to heat pumps and that kind of stuff, if there's funding there, so I guess that's where my thinking is, if that helps that, then I guess there would be savings. But then the cost of buying the infrastructure is a high cost before you get that savings back. But if it helps you get into a grant, I don't know, are there grants out there? I don't know.
Thank you for the question, Councilor McQueen, through you, Mr. Warden. And we've actually already been able to take advantage of some of those grants. There's some grant programs through Enbridge, where we've demonstrated that through some of the actions to be able to reduce some of our energy consumption and our use of gas in this case, which seems kind of interesting in that Enbridge is funding reduction in gas usage, but that's their contribution to try to, again, reduce the overall greenhouse gas emissions from a corporate perspective. So they're funding these municipalities and others through these programs. And we've been able to take advantage of those through Rebecca and Kira and be able to apply for those funds. In some cases, it's just demonstrating that we're doing this action and they're able to provide those funds to us. In some cases, it's through what we call energy treasure hunts, where by having some of this data, we can go in and look at a facility in a building. Again, these are supported funding mechanisms that are fully support the. They bring in an energy team that essentially looks at all the data and usage and looks at your building and looks for those opportunities to be able to reduce. And we've been able to do that through some of our facilities already. And we're starting to see some of the costs, the hydro costs, electricity costs reduction as a result of that. As Rebecca noted, by having this data, though, we'll be able to better monitor and track some of this on a go-forward basis. And going back to even the historical data of 2018, we know there's already some measures that we've done and put in place since 2018 to be able to track that and show, okay, what's working, what's not working, will help us with future investments then on what capital improvements should we be targeting to be able to get the best bang for a buck.
Thank you, Randy. Okay. I'll call the question. All those in favor? That is carried. Okay, we're going to take it back to 6B, the consent item that was removed for further discussion. It is regarding the correspondence requested or received from Gary Stocking. And that will be spoke to by Scott Taylor, it tells me on the paper here. So Dane, what did you want to do with that? Sorry, go ahead.
For purposes of, we should have a motion on the table. I'll move to receive information, and my goal here is to request a staff report just on the program itself, what's happening in neighboring municipalities and counties, and what improvements we may want to make to this program.
Okay. So I'm sure the clerk captured that. To receive and request a further staff report, will probably catch it. Is there a seconder for that? Councillor McQueen, thank you. Any discussion? Councillor McQueen.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. It did say in the letter that from the author of the letter that if he needed any information, and I would suggest the possibility that individual come and speak to us. He seems to have quite a bit of knowledge of what he's talking about. And then we could ask questions and be a little bit more informed as well. I'm going to get into the whole the discussion around now, because if there's a report comes back, we can talk further about that, because I definitely feel it needs to be reviewed. But is that something that could be suggested? I don't know, or does that need to be an amendment? Because he did say that if he needs any other information, and if he was able to come and speak to us, it's a delegation. I think that would, and maybe that could be there around the time when the report comes back.
Well, I would dare say that staff in generating the report would probably contact Mr. Stocking and and they may determine that they want him to come and speak. Councillor Greg.
Thank you for the opportunity. And I was also wishing to pull this. I don't know if we even need to go to a staff report. Last year, we had from staff a proposed budgetary increase for this particular line item. I think it was 10,000. They were asking to go to 15,000 because it's been flatlined for 10,000 for a long time. And I'm just hopeful council this year, even though it was my motion last year to remove it, I'm hopeful council will just increase it back to that proposed staff increase of last year of $5,000 because it is overdue. We just had a really difficult budget year last year. Will be again. But this letter just highlights the need for that. So that's what I'm just hoping council will be appreciative of and supportive of.
Councillor Eccles.
Just a point of order. So on my screen here, I've got a motion, but I got not moved and seconded that we receive the report on increasing the bounty for removal of nuisance wildlife, and the staff be directed to prepare a report reviewing the annual costs of the program and rates in comparative municipalities. Is that?
Yep, that's what's on the floor. And I recognize we do not have a mover and seconder yet, but thank you for reminding me. Do we? Yes, we do. All right, we already do have a mover and seconder, so. You're satisfied with that?
Yeah.
Got lots of help here this morning. Not all of it's qualified. Counselor Nielsen.
Thank you, Warden Bill. Just a comment to Counselor Greg. The budget increase last year, I don't know if it was for a rate increase, was it for because of the number of bounties that are being paid out? So looking for the staff report, do we want to increase the rate to try to attract more trappers and more specialists to take care of the nuisance animals, or is it just an increase because of the numbers that are being collected? So that's kind of why I was looking for the staff report, to help give me a little bit more background on that.
And we look forward to that staff report if the motion succeeds. So Scott, please.
Back in my favorite position. Thank you, Mr. Warden and members of council. Just very briefly, and thank you for all the comments and questions. Staff are happy to prepare a report at council's direction, of course. There's sort of two issues here. And Councillor Gregg alluded to the budget process last year, and luckily I was sitting beside Mary Lou and she can remind me of things as well. Last year we were looking to increase the dollar value for beavers and coyotes based on the number of claims we were receiving. So that wasn't necessarily paying out more to any individual trapper per claim. It was based on the total number of claims. The amount we pay out per claim is set by two bylaws. There's one dealing with beavers and the other is dealing with coyotes and wolves. And as Mr. Stocking has noted, that's $25 per beaver and $50 per coyote or wolf. And so in order to amend that amount paid per claim, we would actually need to update the bylaws. So this is something that the staff report, if council wishes, can get into further to examine and share with you that process. We're certainly more than happy to look at what our neighbors are doing. Sarah Johnson, who is away at the Forest Festival today, has already been looking into this a little bit, so we can certainly build on the work that she's done. But I just want to make the distinction between the number of claims versus the amount paid per claim, and the amount paid per claim is in those bylaws. And in order to change those, we would need to take the bylaws back through council in that regard. And further to some of the points raised, we can certainly get in touch with Mr. Stocking and try to understand his perspective more as a trapper, or if there's other trappers that would like to contribute to this. If we do get into a change to the bylaws, certainly their feedback would be invaluable as well.
Thank you, Scott. Councillor McQueen.
Certainly support moving forward. Just a little bit of a perspective. I don't know, those around the table have heard a lot of comments that there seems to be lots of coyotes out there and lots of hooting and hollering in the evening all over the place. And I've had people talk to me about coyotes going in people's garages. Not only cats and dogs missing, but squirrels and chipmunks and all other stuff too. So there seems to be quite a population of, I actually have a couple of videos on my phone that I've captured in the evening of them all of a sudden hooping and hollering. So I just think that, part of that report, I think there has been an increase. I know I did ask my dad a number of years back. I said, was there coyotes back when he farmed when he was a young guy? And he said, no. So it's something that has developed over the years, and I think we can all attend to that. And so anyway, or coy dogs, or however you want to describe them. And I think in the sense of beavers, I think there was a good example in that letter how we as municipalities are dealing with culvert and flooding and good talk about preserving agricultural land. Well, agricultural land doesn't work too good unless you're growing rice and it's flooded. So I think there's also a part of, a balance on regards to what's happening there as well. So just a couple points of perspective. Thank you, Mr. Ward.
Thanks, Paul. Okay. Call the question. All those in favor? That is carried. Thank you very much. So, closed meetings. We have a motion in front of us, a procedural motion first, that the committee of the whole meeting agenda be amended by adding an additional closed meeting item referred by this council to this committee of the whole, being a follow-up to the CAO committee regarding personal matters about an identifiable individual, including municipal or local board employees, and that the notice required by the procedural bylaw be waived. We do need a 2/3 majority for this. Someone care to move that, please? Councillor Nielsen, seconded by Councillor Pringle. Discussion? All those in favor? I will say we got unanimous on that. So that brings us to the motion to go into closed session. That the committee of the whole does now go into closed session pursuant to section 239 of the Municipal Act as amended to discuss, one, a proposed or pending acquisition or disposition of land, specifically Sydenham campus property. And two, personal matters about an identifiable individual, including municipal or local board employees. Councillor Dickert and Councillor Patterson will move and second that. Any discussion? All those in favor? That is carried. And I'm not sure who
Everybody
is,
stays, they can all stay.
they can all stay apparently. We'll do the personal matters about an identifiable individual first. And then we'll do the disposition or acquisition of land second. Thank you, Olivia. We got the thumbs up. So I can confirm, or we are back in open session. I can confirm that we only discussed those items listed on the closed meeting agenda. Any other business come before this council today? Notice of motion, Councillor Gregg.
Thank you. Whereas there is opportunity in the Municipal Act to assign a councillor to the position of county councillor if municipal requirement exists, and whereas electronic participation enhances the ability to councillors to attend virtually, that Grey County Council remove the role of temporary designate and remove the funding for such position in the 2025 budget.
Okay, that will come forward on the next agenda, I presume. Yes, it will. Okay, any other notice of motion? I need a motion to adjourn. Councillor Eccles, Councillor Nielsen. All those in favor? We're adjourned. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Lunch is in the adjoining room.